Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Radclyffe, and we are here, I hope, to discuss conflict. Is it overrated in romance? What I'm going to do is ask each of the authors who are with me this afternoon to introduce themselves and say who they are, what they like to write, and what their most recent book was. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Radclyffe. I wear a few different hats: author, editor, publisher. This afternoon, it's moderator. So I'm going to turn it over to Aurora to introduce herself and tell us what she's up to.
Thanks, Rad. I'm Aurora Rey. I write contemporary sapphic romance, occasionally queer romance with trans main characters. I tend to do the softer, gentler, fluffier kind of romance, low on angst, high on foodie, nerdy, DIY leading characters. And my latest book is It Happened One Semester, which came out in October. It's leaning heavily into the nerdy. It features a college administrator who falls for a ambitious young new professor.
Okay. All right. MJ, you're muted. You're not muted.
Hi, I'm not muted anymore. My name's MJ Williamz. I write romance, sapphic romance, mostly erotic romance. Though my last book, Chasing Her Scent, was just regular romance. It was out in November, and it features an owner of a small bookstore in Quebec City and a neurosurgeon from Houston who's in Quebec City for a conference, and a treasure map they find. My books are pretty much erotic. The erotic ones are definitely feel good. The rest of them seem to be too.
Okay. Kel?
I'm Kel McCord. I write contemporary sapphic romance. My third book, Experts Only, just came out in March. It's a age gap friends to lovers romance.
Okay, good enough. Joe?
Couldn't find the mute button. Sorry, guys. I'm Joe. I write contemporary sapphic romance as well. Most of mine are small town, rural. I draw a lot on my own kind of inspiration from my own life events and that sort of thing. My latest novel is called Heart's Appraisal, and it's set in Alabama. And it's about a realtor, was an attorney turned realtor, moved to the area, thinks she's going to make a lot of cash pretty quick, and comes to find out that the community is a little smarter than she thinks it is. So a lot of humor. That's what I'm into. I'm trying to dabble in a little bit of romantasy right now, but I don't really have a timetable on that, so don't get greedy. Yeah, pretty much an open book.
All right, thank you. And Jenna Jarvis.
Hi, yeah, I'm from Scotland. I mostly write sapphic romance, though I do also dabble in other forms of queer fiction across the board. Currently have a sapphic epic fantasy series going. Started with Digging for Heaven, and my book that came out last year was Ride It Out, which is a second of a contemporary romance loose series that I've been doing, which has mostly been interesting for me as a Scottish person writing a lot of American people, which sometimes I need to fact check a lot of. And I'm just going to apologize in advance if I do have to run away early. It's because a small child has woken up and I need to run away. So I'm so sorry about that.
Okay. Well, you can always bring your small child in because, we like pets and babies. All right. So everybody writes romance to a certain extent, either primarily or in some of their works as a secondary, if you're writing romance along with fantasy or speculative fiction. So I'm going to ask Aurora a question to get us a foundation, which is, for the purpose of fiction, how would you describe conflict? What are we talking about when we talk about conflict? I told you it was easy.
I have had a much easier time as a writer and a lot more fun with my stories when I started thinking of conflict as tension, and not necessarily as something super overt, super dramatic, super angsty, but as kind of the real challenges of navigating life as a feeling adult with, let's be honest, most of us have some baggage and some childhood trauma that we're carting around with us. And we do our best and get involved with people and love them deeply. And sometimes the baggage we carry and the baggage they carry create challenges. And I think finding ways to allow people to come together and have friction and have tension rub up against one another and create a sense that things may not be as good as we want them to be, or that what we thought was a situation is maybe not, is actually where most relationships potentially fall apart, but also get a whole lot stronger and develop into the kind of relationships that last. So that's how I think of it.
Okay, I like it. I think the concept of challenge is really valid, because when the works that we're writing, when we're writing romance in particular, both characters need to be challenged in some way. I'm going to toss it over to Joe, who's sitting right underneath you on my board here, and ask you, in addition to challenge, if I said to you, how do we think about conflict? What are the two kinds of conflict that we think about? Does anything come to mind?
I mean, you have interpersonal conflict.
Okay. Take it.
With, just within the relationship with another person. You also have like personal conflict, like with self, conflict with society. Man, I mean, I'm a former English teacher, so I had to teach these things. So I maybe have more of a dictionary definition of them than you're looking for. But, man versus self, right? Where it's something we're dealing with. I personally, being from Alabama, have a lot of religious trauma. So that is something that I have to deal with. Labels, being a butch woman is difficult in the South sometimes. And then, of course, man versus man, society, the way society views me, expects me to be a pretty little lady. And that's just not who I am. And then, of course, man versus world or environment, man versus nature, just the environment that we live in, living in rural Alabama and having to deal with mosquitoes. I mean, that is an awful challenge. But I mean, tension and challenge can be found. It's just life. I mean, really, that's kind of how I view it. And the way that I try to write it is that it comes up as an organic process of just trying to be the best human you can be, maybe. So I don't know if that really answered your question as far as two specific types of conflict.
It does. It was a great answer. Does anybody have anything else they want to tag on to that or comment about how to think about conflict? I think the reason I'm asking is because when we sit down to write, there are certain things that we need to do, that we need to plan out ahead of time. And when we think about conflict or story structure or character development, it helps us to have some kind of picture in our mind of what we're trying to find. So when we think about conflict, anybody else have anything else to add to Joe and Aurora's very good answers?
I think I would add,
Go ahead,
think
Joe.
of conflict as what keeps us apart, right? What's the thing that makes it in a romance to where we can't be together? Yeah. And sometimes that conflict is external or distance or something like that. But I love the idea of it as tension. And just how are we not just going to be happily ever after in the first chapter?
Okay. MJ, anything? You good?
I'm good, thanks.
All right. I want to summarize just a little bit, because whoever gave me this panel knows that it's a passion of mine. Internal, external are the two big buckets, right, that Joe was talking about. And the external can be many things, us versus the outside world, the storms that we have to deal with, the hurricanes, the plagues. Those are our external conflicts. Sometimes we're in conflict with ourselves because what we think we want isn't what we really want to work for, or we're afraid to go after. So that's kind of the internal conflict. And there are many levels of internal conflict. And that's where I want to go next, is to kind of tease out, especially for the young authors who may be listening, but also for the readers who will be looking for these things. If I said, give me an example of an internal conflict, MJ, I'm going to hit you now, what would you come up with?
Internal conflict, I would say that would be a need for personal growth being the big one. something you struggle with about yourself that makes you unready to pursue the person you're going after, something inside you, whether it's perceived or real, but something that is in you that's stopping you from moving forward.
Okay. All right. Jenna, can you give an example of what that might be? Something something that stops us personally from connecting with other people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what we were already saying, like things like religious conflict and things like that, or man versus self and things like that. So, like, if say it was a religious conflict, obviously we're reading a lot of queer novels. If that was personally a hang up for someone in the relationship, that would obviously be a huge thing to overcome, but not necessarily something that made the person who had that hang up a bad person. So it's yeah, it's about finding the conflicts that you can't get over in your head or need to get over in the context of the story without that necessarily being something you're like attacking the other person with. It's just something that's inside of you, potentially in the internal conflicts.
Okay.
Um,
All right. Kel, got anything that you could describe as an internal conflict?
Yeah, in my most recent book, the one of the main characters is finally discovering that she's into women, right? So she's gone her whole life thinking she's heterosexual. She married someone, she had 2 kids, and now it doesn't fit anymore. So I think that's a pretty common conflict in a lot of the writing that we do, whereas, people have to discover who they are themselves.
Okay. All right. Aurora, one to throw out?
Sure. I in my most recent release, the professor is someone who takes herself and her work and her career very seriously. It is her life's calling. Her father was a professor, that it is kind of at the core of her identity. And the person that she falls for, she finds out a little later maybe than she should, is responsible or owns a satirical social media account that pokes fun at college faculty. And so she's forced to confront this idea of something that she holds as a core tenet of who she is as something that's something to be made fun of by the person that she thought she loves. And it makes her sort of confront the truth in some of that and all the good stuff.
Well, listening to what you just said, you just enumerated both their internal and their external conflict, which is always, I think, best. And we'll talk a little bit about that balance. Joe, do you have anything to add? You kind of nailed the conflict a little bit earlier in terms of the wide categories.
I just want to add that I want to read this book that Aurora.
I could see you laughing while she was talking.
I really love, because that could just really set. I don't know. It sounds amazing. I'm excited about that one. I'm trying to think if I have anything. I mean, again, coming from the South, in the latest book that I've written, Heart's Appraisal, one of the characters, Hazel, fortunately is not a survivor of the same sort of like conservative evangelical denomination that a lot of us were, but she still has these sort of Bible verses in her head. She still has this like rote memory of these are the really strict black and white moral lines, and she has to kind of steal that voice and say, hey, shut up, I'm trying to live my life and I'm trying to be happy. And she has to decide that that's more important than falling into line with her community. So I mean, I think that kind of falls into it, but I'm really just excited about Aurora's book is why I just want to read that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's emerging as everybody is talking about their books is that we are all able to see how what we call conflict is actually part of character and an important part of how we develop the characters. And I just want to give a little tiny example. When you think about, let's just take someone who is abandoned as a child. So that person, when you're thinking about what their conflict might be, what would you think that they would be? What would their internal conflict be if they grew up having been abandoned? Anybody got a thought? Kel, I think you have a thought.
That they're unlovable.
Okay. And how does that impact how you develop that character in a romance?
Well, trying to be in a relationship when you don't think you're deserving of love or you've never felt that kind of love will lead to a lot of interesting situations depending on who you're pairing yourself with, right?
Yeah, I think it's exactly as simple as that. To find something in the backstory when you're putting your characters together, ask them who they are and where they came from. And if you have an element like that, you can see how easily that develops into an aspect of your story. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about conflict. I know that everyone thinks conflict has to be angsty, so let's go there. MJ, you're grinning. What do you think?
I hate conflict with a passion in life. I'm getting better at writing it.
That's why I got you there.
I think that if you're going for external conflict, there's usually some angst involved. Internal conflict, I much prefer personally because I like to develop the character more as the story moves on, seeing them come into their own, realizing, overcoming obstacles internally. But yeah, external conflict is angst to me. It just is. Sorry.
I think that's an interesting answer because I think most people, and everybody here can correct me, find internal conflict the most difficult thing. Aurora?
Yeah, I don't write any like romantic blend or romantasy where you can have like a bad guy that like comes in and like is the conflict that they have to overcome. It's always between the two characters. And while I shy away from what, as MJ said, what feels angsty, I think one of the really interesting juxtapositions is characters who sort of speak and act not in alignment with their thoughts and feelings. And I think it's a very wide, a big umbrella, and it can be really fun and hilarious when characters are literally having thoughts and then saying the opposite. You can create a lot of humor that way. I think it can be really genuine. I think it can be maddening for a reader when it feels like a character is just sort of like incapable of sort of owning their thoughts and feelings, or having a certain level of self-awareness. Like for me as a reader, like that, I get very bored with characters who like, could you please just go to therapy? I mean, don't get me wrong. I've spent many, many years in therapy and still, managed to have some conflict in my relationships. It is a lifelong process, but I think it's that tension that you can play with and you can kind of eke some good tension out of. And it's really about walking that line to make it feel authentic and compelling without heavy-handed.
Jenna, how about you? Do you think internal conflict or external conflict is easier for you?
I think external probably, because I think I love internal conflict because it means you've got real characters with flaws. But it is obviously you need to then write really good real characters with flaws. I think either way, readers shy away from anything that feels contrived. I think that's what we were saying almost with what MJ was saying, like is like people don't like angst for the sake of it, like in terms of like there was no reason why they had to be split apart at this moment. There was no reason why this person would suddenly be a terrible person and shut the other person out. But if it makes sense for the world or for the characters, then I'm a crazy angst lover. I love angst. I think it's great. I think we should chuck it in everywhere. I think it's best when the characters are being tortured, and I think it's even better when they're doing it to themselves because they're secretly terrible people, or they're good people, but they have these terrible things that have happened to them and they can't be any other way. So I'm very pro chucking it all in there. And yeah, I think I very much I love internal conflict as a sort of it's when it's the juiciest is that so I've got a fantasy series where I write a dragon slayer and a dragon rider who fall in love, and that's very fun for me in that it's the mixture of external and internal that we're talking about. I think that's when it's the juiciest because I think just more angst is good if it's well done.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between angst, which is something that a character struggles with, and something that you make up as something that you put on the character that they don't own, that doesn't come anywhere from the backstory that you've created. Joe, I see you shaking your head. Does that ring a bell?
I definitely agree. I think that internal stuff definitely comes from a history or a context of the person, place. Absolutely. And I do love that. I think that you're giving these characters an opportunity to grow. You're giving them space and tools and situations in which they have to make a decision. And the decision that they make ultimately affects the rest of the plot. And that romance, excuse me, you can see where my head is. Romance really does, it should be pushing the plot forward as well. It shouldn't just be in there for no reason. Whatever helping, or if you use a dollop, or you're using a whole spoonful of it, it should be in there to push the plot forward. And then anything that happens externally should also just be a way to set up for that decision to be made, or the mistake to be made, the failure to happen, or the self-doubt to happen. Like, all of it should be working cohesively to push everything forward in an organic way, because that manufactured stuff is just, I'll put a book down if it feels contrived, it feels fake, or it's just, and I'm like, God, I saw that coming, that was trash, and I'll put it down. And I mean, I can be a harsh critic, I suppose, but I think all writers, I think we kind of have to be, to know what we want to do and what we don't want to do. But I think all of it should really work together. That should be the goal.
I think the word that keeps coming up is authentic. I think also consistency. Characters need to act consistent with the personality that you've developed, with their history and the backstory that you've revealed for them. So let's go to Jenna. When you start thinking about the book, when do you start thinking about conflict? When do you decide, what is my character's conflict? Do you or don't you do it intentionally? Or do you wait for it to happen in the shower?
Yeah, I think a mixture, because I think for me anyway, I think I'm sometimes especially depending on genre, like sometimes I'm thinking more about plot and sometimes I'm thinking more about characters first. But either way, I think there's an idea of some kind of external or internal conflict that you have an idea of, at least a germ of, for there to be some sort of friction to want a story out of. At least in like a lot of traditional Western storytelling, there is that sense of, well, why aren't the characters together immediately? Why do we have a story in this case? So like a lot of mine are more of a sort of enemies to lovers situation, or at least a sort of, there's a friction there, because honestly that is easier to write in terms of like, well, they're not together because they're against each other on every like opposite level, and isn't that fun to put them together as people who attract each other. But sometimes it is more, oh, they're perfect for each other, and then you kind of need to figure out, again, it's just sort of figuring out that, well, why aren't they together immediately? And sometimes that does take time to come. I've got yeah, one of my contemporary road trip romance stories was a road trip novel, and it was called Ride With Me. And that one is much more of a, they grow together, but it's, for me anyway, it's very clear from the start, these aren't characters who think this can be something that lasts. So that's just sort of baked into who they are. This isn't something they believe they can have. So that's obviously got to come to a head for them to be allowed to have it. Um, so yeah, I think mostly it's in coming up with the characters, the conflict is clear.
Okay, because you mentioned enemies to lovers, which is a trope, which is a popular one, very popular actually. And sometimes in the tropes, when we think about them, the conflict is built in almost, which is helpful. And it gives us a starting place. So I'm going to move over to MJ, who loves angst, and ask him, do you intentionally sort out the conflict before you start writing, when you start thinking about your characters? Or is it something that comes sort of into form as you write?
My first few novels, I would say it came into form as I wrote. However, having been with Bold Strokes for a while now, I've learned that in the development, I need to get the conflict figured out before I sit down and start writing the book.
Okay. Joe? Up front or as you go?
Mine is up front. Probably my first novel was more as I went, but again, like MJ said, I was kind of finding out who I was as an author. But I would say I have a very hard time with organizing things. I'm incredibly ADHD, and so to sit down and force myself to do that really gives me a much better blueprint. And then I am able to add stuff in and get a little crazy and that sort of thing. But I really like to figure out at least the bare bones of it. And then I like to add a little humor or that sort of thing in there. But I do better when I can plan it out up front.
Okay. Kel, do you start with conflict? Do you think about it first when you're developing character?
Okay, I'm getting better. And I think I'm on this panel so that Rad can tell me to add more conflicts, because that is without fail my biggest note. My second novel, I could hear Cindy yelling at me through the page on where is the conflict. So I'm getting better. So now I try to think of, okay, the character's at the end of their rope. What does she want and why can't she have it? And if I start from that place, then it's easier to find the conflict. I'm not great at plotting everything out, so I have an idea of where I want things to go, but sometimes these characters have other ideas and they take you somewhere else.
Aurora, do you have any little tricks to help you when you're just getting ready to put words to paper?
Yeah, it's funny because I often think of conflict as this like kind of two-tiered thing. There's the meet cute conflict, like that initial conflict of why are they not immediately hitting it off and starting to date and get together. And that always comes super easy for me. Like I love a meet cute. I love that original banter. If I could write the first third of every book, get them to the first sex scene and then like not have to write the rest, I would probably be really happy. And then there's the sort of dark moment, right? The like, wow, we've actually fallen in love and now something's happening that makes it seem like maybe things aren't going to work out. And, you know, trying to do that in a way that doesn't feel contrived, doesn't feel like, you know, the inevitable third act breakup is, I think, where the challenge is. And I have started trying to invest more in the beginning for what that's going to be. What I find interesting is that sometimes that's actually a plot-based conflict. And so then the work is actually figuring out how that external conflict parallels with internal conflict. How do you seed the personality? How do you seed the trauma or the wound throughout the entire story, even as they're falling in love, so that when something happens that makes two people who have maybe even decided they're in love with each other think maybe we can't be together, like how do you make that feel genuine? And it doesn't always happen in the first draft. Sometimes you have to layer that the building blocks in after the fact. But I think the more you can think about it ahead of time, the easier a time you have it. Especially if you're like me and you write out of order, which is sacrilege to a lot of folks.
We won't talk about that right now. There's a question in the chat, which is what I was going to ask next. I was remiss not to tell everyone to put your chats in the little chat box, which is down at the bottom where it says Q&A. I believe you can do that so that I'll be able to find them, because if I miss them over there. The question was, if you're writing a cozy fantasy, how do you ensure the stakes are high enough if there is insufficient conflict? So the answer really is, do we need conflict? Or can we just write, look at MJ. After 20 years, you're still going to shake your head. Do we need it? I mean, can't we just write stories about nice people who do cool things and drink wine together and play cards and go to baseball games and have hot sex? Why can't we do that? So, Kel, you're laughing. Why can't we?
And that's my question. Why can't we do that?
Well, you got to fit it into 70,000
Well,
words.
it's not interesting. So I think where I struggle, right, is the world is so hard, and the world is so hard right now. That when I sit down to write, it usually just then turns into these happy things because I want to go to a happy place, but it's not interesting. So we need that keeping them apart to keep us engaged as readers. So otherwise we just get jealous that everybody's off having fun and we're not.
Joe, I like baseball games and barbecues, by the way, but you know, they're going to show up in my books. But Joe,
I mean, I think it goes back to what I said before about the conflict really being this opportunity for the characters to grow. And hey, pop, sorry, distracted. So if you are writing dynamic characters, if your goal is to have characters who change, who grow, who become better, who realize more about themselves, who become a better partner, then you have to have some sort of conflict. My wife is a huge cozy reader. Like, she wants stuff that's cozy. She wants the ideal. She wants things to be happy, mostly because of what Kel said. The world's kind of crazy right now, especially. We just really want something that makes us feel good. People get together and they live happily ever after. And that's amazing. But I feel like it doesn't, personally, in my writing, it doesn't leave enough room for people to change, because humans are constantly evolving, and we should be. Sorry. I'm sorry. Anyways,
Sorry
so
about that.
I'm sorry. So we should leave room for those characters to change, and that's why I think it's incredibly important to have conflict.
okay, Jenna, could you conceive of a book without conflict?
Yeah, of course. Like I think you can have like I honestly cozy kind of annoys me as a marketing term, which doesn't feel very real. Like I think you could have like any kind of level of like low stakes drama of any genre, and I think that's great and that's always existed. Like one of my favorite movies is the I think it's Danish or something. It's like the Babette's Feast one. And the whole tension of that movie is just, are these strange little puritanical village going to enjoy this French woman's cooking? And that's the entire tension of the movie. And it's really tense and I cry. Like you can make stakes out of anything you like. You can make tension and conflict out of anything, because the idea is like, oh well, these like little Danish village are all really bigoted and they think she's going to serve them something strange and terrifying, where she's actually just trying to make them nice French food. And like you can do whatever you like with whatever level of stakes that you have available to you. Um, and if you're selling it and if your characters care about it, like, you know, what we were already saying, it's about, well, how are the characters growing? Like, are the characters, is this life and death to the characters? And it probably is to someone who's neurotic enough about the cooking in this case, or the barbecue.
You said two things that are really important. One is stakes, and the other is what you didn't say, but what you framed is story question. There are things that drive a story forward, which is what Joe alluded to before. Conflict is one of them. One is the story question. And maybe it is a simple question like, are the villagers going to eat what she cooks? But that's not really the story. The story is what happens to her if they don't eat the food, or what does she invest personally and why does it matter? And that comes back to character. And character is always multidimensional. And one of the things, may for her, for that character, there probably was a level of conflict in that maybe she had to sacrifice. I mean, conflict is not always angsty, although it really should be, MJ, I think, really, because but I think those are good examples, and that answered that question really well. MJ, if you don't like angst, what keeps your characters apart?
Something always keeps them apart. I know. I've learned. Girl meets girl, girl loses girl, girl gets girl back. So something has to happen. I can throw in angst when I absolutely have to. I just don't like coming to that part of the pre-writing where I'm like, okay, you got two great characters. They both have issues. They're both going to work on those issues. They're going to get together. What's going to keep them apart? I don't enjoy it, but like especially now, like I think it was Joe that said the world's kind of crazy right now and everybody just kind of wants comfort and everything. It's hard to throw in angst, but I can do it, and I can make like people freak out because they've been burned before and everything's going great, and then suddenly they see something or they remember something or blah blah, blah and something's going to tear them apart, and it's going to be angsty and it's going to be uncomfortable, but they're going to get back together, and that's what keeps me going.
Okay, so you're equating angst with something that breaks them up, or something super dramatic, not something that lives inside the character that they struggle with.
Well, I mean, there's angst for what's inside the character. Obviously, that's just easier for me. That's like,
Okay.
I've been burned and I don't want to trust and I will never trust again. And
Okay.
that's one to overcome. To me, that stuff's not as angsty because that's easy. It's the external stuff. It's what's going to split these people apart that really is hard for me.
Okay. I mean, I think for all of us, because like Kel said, we're writing romance because we want to write about people who love each other and end up together and who are happy. And it's a really hard to figure out, how do I keep them apart when what I really want to do is get them together. I mean, and sometimes when we're at 40 or 50% of the book, we're like, where do I go from here? And how do I get 70,000 words when I'm ready at 35,000 words for them to hop into bed and it's all done now? And that's where I think understanding the depths of our characters and letting it breathe on the page will get us to the word count at the end, and also give the readers a nice journey. That's just, a little thought that I had. One of the questions that was asked to me about this is, in today's world, do we think that readers, or people in general, as Joe was mentioning about her wife, are looking to read books that aren't emotionally taxing? And if we think that's true, how would we address that as authors? It's a very broad question, but something that comes up when I think we all have to think about, what do people want to read? I mean, as authors, we have to think about, at the end of the day, what do they want to read? So go ahead, MJ. Got a thought on that?
I do have a thought. My
Okay.
thought is, of course, everybody should be happy all the time. Nobody should have angst. It's all good. But it does have to happen. I think in today's society, especially in the US, I'm not there, but life is really complicated and tough and difficult. However, I think if you write the conflict well enough in your book, you've got the people invested in the characters. Now they see the conflict, they're invested in that, and they really want to keep reading to move the characters forward to get back together again. I think that's a better escape, if that makes sense.
Okay. I don't disagree with that at all. I don't have any problem writing conflict. I love to write conflict. That's the very first thing I think about when I sit down to write a book. Kel, what do you think? Keep it light, or you can manage conflict? And again, I'm not talking about characters fighting with each other. I think we all know that. We're talking about the things that we as individuals, as people in today's world, struggle with.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing a lot of now is readers are sick of the third act breakup. I think that's become a little bit too predictable for some folks. And so in the current thing I'm working on, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I have enough conflict without that third up breakup, right? Like, what else can we do to make it interesting, to make the ending feel earned, like people are mentioning in the chat. So I think we got to have a certain level there, but I do think that readers tire when we all lean in too heavily on one thing.
Okay, Aurora?
Yeah, I think there are always people who prefer like a gentler story, and there are people who will always love a super high conflict story. I think I have seen sort of enough folks saying that they want more escape, a little bit more kind of gentle story right now, just because the daily act of moving through this world is just a constant bombardment. And so going into a story where the characters are just like suffering all the time feels like self-flagellation almost. Like it's just people are sometimes looking into their stories for a reprieve from that and not vicarious flagellation, I guess. And I don't think it absolves us as writers from writing compelling conflict into our stories. I think, if anything, it's actually more important. And to me, the ability to write really compelling, high stakes conflict that exists on a more subtle level is actually really challenging and like so phenomenal. If I feel like I've pulled it off in a story, or if I read a book and it was pulled off, like that actually stays with me sometimes more than something super, super kind of grand and what like kind of is obviously high stakes. So I think it's about that. And I think it's about kind of how you fill how secondary characters and subplots and kind of interiority, like you can make that really angsty or you can make that really, really playful, regardless of how the emotional conflict of the story is going. And I'm just someone, I prefer the fun banter. I enjoy reading it. I enjoy writing it. It feels playful. It feels buoyant. Like that's what I'm looking for, but I still want characters who earn their happy ending. And that's a very loaded phrase. My therapist and I talk a lot about earning love. But I think in the context of a story, yes, you want to feel like the characters have earned that happily ever after.
Joe, what do you think? Are you an anti-conflict person?
No, I like it. I enjoy it. I do think though that there is merit in layering those smaller conflicts, because then that gives the characters something to draw on when they're tackling those bigger conflicts. They have more confidence when they're approaching it. And I do like what Aurora said about secondary characters being able to kind of shoulder some of that burden as well, them having real lives and the community being a real place full of real people. And even talking about past conflicts that have happened in the community or potential conflicts that might happen in the future. And even though they're not ongoing to the story now, they're still germane to how the characters are going to handle what they're going through now. I think that can help carry some of the burden of the big high stakes conflict.
I think that partially answers a question that I'm going to throw out to everyone. There's two from the audience here. How many conflicts do you think a story should have? Or how many, why can't they be together? And Joe, I think you touched on that just now a little bit, where you said the word layered. So can you elaborate a tiny bit on that? We've got just a couple minutes left.
Yes. So, thanks for putting the pressure on there, Rad. So
No
I think, I definitely think especially when I'm considering the romance beats, I try to plot the romance beats along with my rising action, my climax, my falling action, all that technical crap. I try to plot all of that simultaneously so that I'm not overburdening the rise to the big pivotal moment, and I'm not letting them down too easy to the point that it just feels like you've pushed them off the cliff and they're free falling. I think that for me personally, there's not a specific number. It depends on the characters. It depends on the secondary characters. It depends on how large the community is. I'm sorry, I can't really throw out a good number there, but I would say for every romance beat or plot point that I am trying to graph in my Excel spreadsheet, I'm trying to hit at least 3 or 4 scenes that I can really craft and try to drive things forward with. Maybe that would probably be my 3 to 4 would be my answer there on each plot point. So that's too many, maybe, but
MJ, do you think about like how much conflict should I have, or do you find that it just arises spontaneously as you're writing?
I usually make sure each character has some internal conflict, and then it takes me a while to really sit and think about how the big external conflict is going to happen, what's going to be the black moment, how we're going to get there, and that takes a lot of thought. And sometimes I get really frustrated because I really want to start writing because I feel like I've got a really good idea, but until I can figure out that black moment and the external conflict. But yeah, I think 3 or 4 conflicts is about right for a book. The internal of each, and then the external.
Kel, since you're still working on it, how do you think about it? Since you're being forced to write conflict.
So I always have to add more, right? Because it always starts out and there's nothing. So then I have to add more. But I think so much depends on the characters, because every person handles conflict differently. And so every character is going to handle conflict differently. And so a lot of it is just who are these people? Who are they representing? And how would they handle that? And then I think that really directs how much conflict goes into it.
Okay. Aurora, real quick. I think we got a couple more minutes.
I like to think of the why can't they's in like different layers, and sometimes it's trope dependent, right? Like, why can't they just get along? Why can't they go out? Why can't they kiss? Why can't they get into bed, right? Like, I love a kissus interruptus, like when you think they want it and then something happens, right? And so it's not always about like, they don't feel like conflict 1, conflict 2, conflict 3. It's tension points or challenges or obstacles every step of the way, that some of which are circumstantial and fun, and some of which are emotional and, really wrenching, that sort of get them to the ultimate, why can't we be together? And like, then that's kind of the ultimate payoff.
I think sometimes as an author, asking ourselves those questions helps us see what the characters are going to go through. I think that also answers the last question. How do you write tension conflict that feels real and authentic and not like you're following a script? And I think every one of you have said it comes from knowing the characters and following the characters. I think if there are no more questions in the chat, I think we're about out of time. I think you guys did it. Oh, I wanted to say one thing, Kel, that you brought up, which was the issue of the breakup. And I do think that is one of those things that's been overused. But the dark moment doesn't have to be a breakup, but it does need to be a withdrawal. And it's usually emotional. It's much more powerful when it's emotional. They may not go away for a month, like if you read some of the classic lesbian and sapphic literature from the 1970s and 1980s, always they broke up and were separated, often by months. That's not the way we write romances today. But I do believe that when we get to that point, MJ, that you've been talking about, that where the angst comes in, that the characters have to pull back until they find within themselves the reason that they're having trouble getting together. And that brings you then to the epiphany and the resolution. I'm just tossing that out there, something to think about. I think you guys did a great job. Thank you very much. And thank you, Sandy, for having us.
Thanks, Rad, and thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah.